Hello and welcome to EPR with your favorite environmental enthusiasts, Nic and Laura. On today's episode, Laura and I discuss my recent trip to Puerto Rico. We talked to Chris Whitehead about air quality, environmental justice, and cumulative impacts. And finally, an average American breathes 2 gallons of air per minute, which means around 3,400 gallons of air each day. For our international listeners, the average person breathes the equivalent of 13 pints of air every minute and takes 17,000 breaths in a day. How about that?
So does that mean are UK breathing more air than we are? How many breaths do we take?
Yeah, I don't know. You know what? That's a great question. Somebody do the conversion for us. Who counts that?
I mean, that's a lot of breathing. Makes me tired just thinking of it.
Yeah, and it's not even like a one-to-one thing because you breathe slower when you sleep. So they got to really, really, really want to know the answer to that question. So
there's probably an iPhone app for that.
There probably is, yeah. And it's right in with what we're talking about today. So why don't we go ahead and hit that music?
The Pennsylvania chapter is hosting its annual Communities, Corridors, and Connections Conference, October 5th through 7th. The theme for the event will promote the importance of working together to learn about the unique interdisciplinary nature of our environmental industry and also highlight today's hot topics and industry updates. You can check that event out at www.paep.org. We are up to over 25,000 downloads across the world, which is pretty awesome. So we appreciate all of our sponsors and all of our listeners and everyone else. But if you would like to keep the show going, please consider sponsoring. If you would like to, head on over to www.environmentalprofessionalsradio.com and check out the sponsor form for details. Let's get to our segment.
I had to go to Puerto Rico for a week and travel the whole island looking for air emissions inventories, looking for air emissions at the Air National Guard throughout the island. So all over the place. And some of it was absolutely interesting, wild, and fun. Some of it was terrifying. We were on some mountainous roads. And yeah, that was pretty scary. It was
Did you find stuff?
Line turns. I mean, we knew what we were looking for. So none of it was like shocking or a surprise or anything like that. But we talk about field experiences, cutting your teeth.
Going out with like giant metal detectors. Like, how are you finding this stuff?
Oh, no. It's it's not like where are the emissions, archaeological or anything like that. It's like we're like, hey, we heard you have 3 generators, and so where are they? And they're like, oh yeah, they're over there, there, and there, but 2 of them don't work. Cool, all right. So we're gonna go look at those now. And they're like, oh, okay. And so it was just different work. It's not normally what I would do, but I was helping pull something together for work, and so I had to go. I had to be the person to go. And we had a little team going out there. It was really cool. At the very end of the trip, we actually did have time to be a little touristy. And we went to, I don't know if you guys know this, but Puerto Rico has 3 of the 5 bioluminescent bays in the world.
What? No.
And so those bio bays are basically, bacteria. And when you put your hand in the water and you move it, it turns blue. And it's the craziest thing in the world. It's so awesome. Cool. It is absolutely wild. And it was just a lot of fun. It was a really cool experience. It was great to see them. It felt like Harry Potter in the water or something like that. I don't know. But but honestly, the thing we remember the most is actually coming back out. There were 2, we had 4 people on the island. So we were all in tandem kayaks. So we had a group in front of me, and then me and my other coworker. And then in front of both of us was this random group, and they could not kayak to save their lives. And it was so funny because they're just like straight left, straight right. And it just, they must have paddled 14 times more than anyone else just to get back. It was really fun. But yeah.
Someone's just really aggressive with the rudder.
Yes. Yeah. I mean, whoever was in the back was just kidding. We're going to go this way into the mangroves. It was amazing.
Well, that's cool. Let's revisit this got to go versus have to go. I feel the negative voice saying I have to go, the positive saying I got to go.
Mm-hmm. It was a mixed bag. The time of year, the timing of it was not great, and there was just nothing I could do about that. And we're very busy with proposal season right now, so it was kind of a challenge for all of that. I worked very hard for 2 straight weeks is almost doubling what I should be doing, which is not healthy. So that was the have to part. Got to is, it's Puerto Rico. It's a beautiful place. And, it still is recovering from Maria. There's still evidence of Maria all over, and they've had an earthquake since then as well. So there's still some natural disaster elements. We saw a building where we were like, where the heck is this building? I mean, there's that destroyed building right there, but that can't be it. And it was it. That was the building had been destroyed since the last time the people had been out there. And that's the kind of stuff you see. But, it was, a beautiful, we had wonderful experiences as well. So it's kind of like, it was a mixed bag. I think that's fair. I had to, and I got to.
Yeah. I wanted to lean more on I got to, just because you also get to go home. Those people have to live there and stay there.
Yeah. Yeah.
Or get to. They get to live there and stay there.
Yeah.
Right.
It's interesting to see, because when you do stuff like that, it's not just that you're going to, we didn't go to the touristy spots, really. We did one touristy thing at the end, but we got to see the island for what it is. And if you know anyone that's ever been there, or anyone that lives there, if you mention the roads, right, they'll know. It means 2 things, right? It means driving in general is kind of chaotic there, and there are potholes everywhere. So you have to be kind of careful where you go. You have to pay attention to the driver in front of you.
Come to Syracuse to train for that.
Yeah, probably. But it's pretty bad. It is. I would say it's worse than like DC driving, to give people some context. It's just, it's pretty intense. So, honestly, when we were doing the mountain roads, we were literally going back and forth, zigzagging around, and there are 18-wheelers that are coming through the same path, and you're like hoping you don't see them on a blind turn, because there's just no other route. Like, there's nowhere else to go. They have to do that. And we got out of the car, and none of us could walk straight. Like, we're all like, our equilibrium is totally messed up. The guy with us is like, now I know what it's like to be a milkshake, It was fun. But yeah, it's, but you see really the real island, not just the tourist and parts. And there, and that's a, humbling experience in some ways. In other ways, it's just kind of like, another place, and it's kind of neat. Mm-hmm. Everybody's just doing what they need to do. Yeah,
that's how I felt about visiting Cuba in the short window that was able to do that.
Yeah. And Puerto Rico.
It's a humbling place for sure.
Yeah. It's just, there's different things. There's the infrastructure on the island is still struggling in some ways to recover.
I'm glad you had a good time for the most part. And I'm looking forward to hearing about your next travels. Where's your next travels?
Probably Albuquerque, probably the White Sands area, maybe.
All right. You get to go to Albuquerque. Cool.
So that'll be October, I think. Or Goldsboro. I'm also going to North Carolina, where I live. So I'm just driving out there. Yeah. Not as exciting.
All right. Let's get to our interview.
Cool.
Welcome back to EPR. Today we have Chris Whitehead, Air Practice Leader at Enviro-Sciences of Delaware, Inc. on the show. Chris is also an NAEP member. Woo! Welcome, Chris.
Thank you for having me.
Awesome. I'm super excited to have you here talking about the sexy world of air compliance and air regulation. So before we jump into your work, though, I don't know that a lot of people who aren't in that field understand what it is. So maybe you could educate us just a little bit on what air quality compliance is, or what being a practitioner is like.
Absolutely. I've been in this field now for almost 16 years, and start off basically by doing what's called compliance reports with every facility in the country, whether it's a major source, which is called a Title V site, or a minor, has to have a permit to operate. And each permit tells them what they can do, what environmental impacts they can have, and then gives various control mechanisms to try to be sure that they stay in those lanes. We help them through all that process, do the reporting for them, stare at endless Excel spreadsheets when they don't want to, and just basically try to make their lives easier as we possibly can.
Nice. So how did your career path progress, and what led you to airfield?
Sure, that's a good question. I actually studied poli-sci undergrad in Chicago, and I thought I was going to go into environmental law. And I actually took the LSAT. Everything did very, very, very well, but then changed my mind last minute, and then started looking for other options that I thought might be a better fit, because I didn't think I wanted to practice law. So one day I was actually serving as a bartender just after college, trying to figure out a few things. And I was speaking to one of my bar guests, and he happened to run a small consulting firm in New Jersey doing this for 40 years or so. He was actually one of the first guys to put emission controls on coal power plants out in the center of the United States, in Michigan, Minnesota, and a few other places. So I had a great opportunity to learn from him directly. So I just thought it was something too good that I couldn't pass up. So I went on to Terranext for about 7 years.
Awesome. Man, we hear from a lot of people that they get their first opportunities from talking to somebody. So that's cool.
Absolutely. That's something you always have to be open to. I think I could try to talk to anybody and just be honest and always joke around about what you're trying to get out of life and what you're hoping to accomplish. And that time the conversation ended up being extremely useful.
Yeah, that's great. Something listeners may not know also is that air and environmental justice have become pretty closely entwined, and they have been for a while. But can you tell us a little bit about the nuances that create that relationship and how practitioners are addressing the issues differently today than maybe they were a decade ago or even just a few years ago?
That's a great question. And to be extremely honest, I tell this story at the beginning of my environmental justice trainings and talks around the country. When I first heard the term environmental justice and stakeholder engagement, it was at a public hearing when I was just starting out, just basically junior consultant. And of course, I'm paraphrasing here, but I was actually told, oh, don't worry about the public hearing. If anyone comes at all, it's probably just going to be odor and noise complaints. We'll be out of here in 2 hours. No big deal. And that never really sat well with me. And just fast forward a few years, I was always trained early on to identify regulations that are going to be impactful for our clients and learn everything we can about them, and obviously tell them ahead of time so there isn't any surprises. When the New Jersey EJ law came out in the fall of 2020, it was pretty obvious that was a law that's going to be checking all the boxes. But what I didn't know at the time is how much my career was going to turn almost on a dime, and how much of my time was going to be spent on environmental justice and interacting with all the groups who've been at this for so much longer than I've even been alive, to be honest.
Right.
But to go back to your original question, though, the air impacts tie in because of something called cumulative impacts. Every site, as I said at the beginning, in the country emits various contaminants into the air at various levels. Most of the time, that's not that big a deal. If you have a good site who's doing what they're supposed to, if there was only them, might not be an issue, might not have health impacts in the area. But if you have numerous ones on top of each other, the same geographic area, eventually that's going to add up. And there are going to be elevated impacts in the area. And unfortunately, things like elevated cases of childhood asthma, extreme cases of actually mortalities, things like that you want to avoid. And just to follow a little further too, one thing I learned early on, there are sites that do a good job in trying to do what they're actually supposed to. And unfortunately, there are many who don't, and who are very tight staff and just do the best they can, but have bigger issues. If you combine that with all those other sites in the area, then that could really adds up. So it's basically what we're facing now.
Yeah. And then speaking of new things in the field, offshore wind and environmental justice are also becoming some issues that you deal with also in your career?
It is, yes. I was fortunate enough a couple of years ago to actually lead the commercial offshore wind project off the coast of Massachusetts. And it was my first exposure to the industry. It's a great experience to understand the nuts and bolts of all the processes that are involved in that type of a scale of a project and the extended timelines. I gained some traction in the last couple of years doing a couple of papers and presentations on looking at the intersection of offshore wind and environmental justice and what exactly that looks like. And I actually did a project last year where I surveyed stakeholders within the industry to get their input as to where they thought the biggest potential environmental impacts from these projects were going to be, how they could be avoided. And then what I was a little surprised by at the time, I first. It became a real study on stakeholder engagement and how we want that to ideally look going forward.
Great. And then what does that look like? What should it ideally look like?
Sure. Almost, I don't want to say it's a talking point that you're going to hear a lot now, but extending community partnerships. A lot of people ask me what that actually means. And I've been advising sites throughout the country now, especially in our area, that it means you have to invest yourself in multi-year effort that goes past just checking the box, just doing a public hearing, and looking at, first of all, an honest accounting of what your environmental impacts actually are, what the makeup of your community is, what the demographics are, what their capabilities are, and then how you can be there to answer whatever questions they have. A big thing is a lot of times people will want to be heard and get their comments or points heard, even if you don't agree with them. If you could extend accessibility and things like having multilingual opportunities and possibly child care at public hearings so working parents can come, it's going that extra mile and putting some thought into these things to show honestly that you care and or want to be a part of the community instead of just located inside of it.
Yeah, that's great. Sounds like a really great career for somebody who cares about people and health, but also likes data and science, right?
Yeah.
What is, after doing it 16 years, what do you really love about it?
I think you could try and do impactful work and still make out at the end of the day. There's a way of doing things that takes a little extra effort up front occasionally to plan these things out and to look for areas to collaborate. But I think that effort up front pays dividends down the line. And one of the things I found I'm actually very good at that I didn't even know last couple of years is I've developed a skill of getting programs together and collaborations together that I get an idea that I want to try and do something, go after it. And I kind of think, okay, who are my dream panelists or who I want to have on this project? And 9 times out of 10, I get it. And that kind of surprised me, to be honest.
Yeah. And, we were talking about impacts, right? So from a NEPA perspective, I think air quality is one of the most quantifiable resource areas we have. And is also one of the most difficult to discuss, particularly like you mentioned with cumulative impacts. To be look back 5 years, 10 years, really even just one project in one area, you can say, well, there's not that many impacts. You add all the other ones up and there are, but we don't even have great ideas on how we truly capture that impact. So do you have ideas or thoughts about how we really genuinely address air quality impact?
Well, a couple of points. There's guidance coming out from various state environmental justice programs on things like defining cumulative impacts. And you have states like New Jersey and New York and a couple others taking the lead on that now. But then there's also guidance being worked on the federal level on the same issue, how to exactly define and go after what your cumulative impacts are. But before you even get there, you can take an honest accounting of what your environmental impacts are. And a lot of sites I know are ISO 14001 certified. And it's as simple as trying to continuously improve to minimize what your environmental impacts are, whether it's air impacts or water, or just basically run down the whole line. Know what you're putting out into the environment. Have an honest internal accounting as extensively as you can as to what they are. From that point, it'll help you be ready when your cumulative impacts are going to be assigned. You'll almost be 3 steps ahead.
Yeah. And do you have a particular model that you appreciate using? I know like the Air Force has their own versions of models and other agencies do too. Is there something that you like to use more than others? Yeah,
I'm going to say I cherry pick a little bit from a couple of existing models and actually developed my own internal spreadsheet.
Oh, that's pretty cool. And
I'm a huge data nerd, man.
Oh, I love it. And it is really genuinely one of the most data intensive fields. So, I mean,
Yeah.
what about it? What about data really drives you? Like, why do you like it so much?
Well, again, going back to something I said before, I like the idea of trying to do impactful work. And if you have a data point, or hopefully, obviously, extensive data points that show something like an elevated impact, that's a huge, huge tool in your tool belt that says, okay, we know ambient air is a problem here. What are we going to do about it? Mm-hmm. Getting past that one point and being able to prove that there is a problem is huge.
Yeah. Yeah. And actually, that's a good segue, because I would say California probably has the strictest air quality regulations in the country. But as you mentioned, states do things differently. And as a whole, do you know where the U.S. falls in relation to other countries when we talk about our air quality regulations? Are we one of the best? Is there room for improvement? Should we all be using the California model?
I find it hard to quantify, are we the best or not? But I will say there's definitely room for improvement. And an important thing to think about, too, is how you define sustainability, and what works in one state might not necessarily be viable in other states. But what I've seen actually firsthand personally the last couple of years is that there's a lot of cherry picking that goes on from state to state, and a lot of states work together on these types of things. Last time, just as an example, the last time I checked in on it, there were 32 states who have recently enacted or proposed something on environmental justice, and each of them have checked in on the New Jersey model. So being from New Jersey, that's something I'm very, very proud of, that although not every state's going to go as far and be as extensive as our program is having influence across the country.
That's awesome. That's great.
That's awesome. Are there parts, so when we think about air quality, and you mentioned partnering with other states and stuff, New Jersey air doesn't belong to just New Jersey, and it came from somewhere else and it's going to go somewhere else. So what are those aspects and parts of air quality that are out of our control, so to say? And, maybe like we hear about Saharan dust or pollutants from other countries in the news a lot. How does that play into determining what's going on in the state and how they define how well they're doing?
Yeah, that is a big issue. And it's been handled recently. A lot of the air impacts that happen in New Jersey come from states like West Virginia, Ohio, Pennsylvania, in some cases, that might still be, like, at times still on coal or a heavier fossil fuel base, and that gets carried over to New Jersey. So we're non-attainment for a couple of things, and we're probably going to be for a while, largely because of that. But you have states like New Jersey working together, the Regional Greenhouse Gas Initiative and other collaborations to hopefully try and address cross-state pollution. But until the states upwind start being aggressive on it as well and start getting off fossil fuels to the extent possible, there's only so much that New Jersey can do internally. Our actual air emissions that we produce because of weather patterns obviously go out to the ocean or upstate New York, but Manhattan, Long Island, things like that. And as we develop offshore wind projects, it's going to help, but that takes time. One of the things I try to get people to remember is there's a lot of exciting things happening right now, and the push to get off fossil fuels is going to help a lot of people and help a lot of health impacts, but it doesn't just happen overnight.
Yeah, very well said. One of the things I think we want to talk to you about today is air quality. You say, data nerd, right? You look at data, but that also means that you have to go get it, right? So we have a segment we call Field Notes, where we talk about what people do to go in the field. And I recently did my very first air emissions inventory in Puerto Rico, driving all over the island, looking at generators. And it was a pretty, intense experience, So can you tell us a little bit about what those air quality projects are like in the field, and like what should people be considering if they want to get into this field?
Sure. It depends on the type of site that you go to. But one of the things I like about consulting is you get exposed to a wide variety of sectors. I've worked in chemical, I've worked in pharma, a lot of power sites. One thing you'll always, almost always anyway, find in common is the site environmental management team is largely overworked and stressed out. So any type of help you can give them, any type of automation or handling things remotely, if possible, will definitely be appreciated. And each project is a little bit different. One of the biggest things, of course, is budgeting and scheduling and trying to stick to each. And as I was told early on when I started this, if you can limit surprises for your clients, you're doing a pretty good job. Yeah. The more good projects you have under your belt with a certain person, the more likely it is that that individual project manager is going to stay with you as time goes on. Because there's a huge amount of turnover in this business, especially the last couple of years. People jumping from company to company. And it's not as much the company or the client staying with you as a consultant. It's that individual project manager.
Yeah, it's a really great point, actually. And honestly, I don't know if we've talked about that as much, but it is really, really important. Relationships are very important. And you touched on something that sparked another question for me. Like, you want to make sure that you're working with the project manager, you guys are getting along, and you don't want to give them any surprises, right? So for air quality, like you say, you're using data, and basically you hit a button, right? And it turns out the data that you need, and then you see what's going on. Or do you have a sense, I guess, over time as you've done this, before you even hit the button, hey, this is going to be an issue? Is that something you just learn over time, or do you have ways to teach people that?
Well, the larger sites, the Title V's, will have what's called continuous emission monitors or SEMs on their equipment most times. And there's regular data readouts and calibrations that have to be done on those units. And you have to report quarterly most times. And so you're on top of this thing a lot. So and I can't even tell you the amount of permits and ink on my hands from going through these things. Once you are comfortable with the site and know what their emission limits are, you're going to get a sense of finding those red flags like, hey, this was over X, Y, or Z minutes or hours. What's the issue? And if it pops up again on your next check and next check after that, yeah, you're going to have something actual concrete to go in and change. It's a little common sense, obviously, but the more often exceedance happens, the more likely it is it's actually a hardware issue and not just maintaining properly or, things like that.
Okay. Yeah, I got you. And, we talk about like all the field mishaps that we have in the field as well. But was there ever a time where you maybe got sick from being out in the field? Story you want to share with us?
Sure. A couple of things come to mind. As I mentioned quickly, I have a SEMS background, and one of the jokes was stack testers and SEMS is the first time you go up on a stack, the person always kind of hugs the stack and doesn't want to even look over the edge at all. So the time I ever did that, I kind of got a little bit sick to my stomach and had to sit down for a couple of hours. But a bigger issue I had actually made the news a little bit. I was exposed to a possible Legionnaire's case. So the Department of Health a little bit more closely than I wanted to. A week and a half. But thankfully, only a bad case of bronchitis and pneumonia. I didn't have Legionnaire's, but it scared the heck out of me.
Yeah.
Oh, I bet.
Oh my gosh. Oh, just pneumonia.
Yeah. If that's you're having a bad couple of days.
Yeah, for real. Oh my gosh. Well, glad you're happy and healthy now.
Thank you for that.
And one of the other things you do, you do a lot of work with presentations and all that. But one of the things we love to ask on the show is, what do you do for fun? What do you do to unwind? What are your hobbies?
I talk on podcasts, man. No. All joking aside, I have two beautiful kids. My son Connor is 5 and my daughter Haley is 3. So I spent a lot of time with them. We just actually taught them to ride to ride his bike yesterday. So I was just...
Oh, wow.
that over the top, excited dad sprinting after my kid as he bolted down the street. But yeah, any type of sports with them, or just being outside with the family, having a good time, going to Phillies games.
Oh man.
But something a little more close to home. I started a vegetable and fruit garden at our house a couple of years ago when we bought the place, and put effort into it. But it's come along to the point where I'd never even have to buy produce at the store anymore. Almost.
Oh wow.
Every day when my daughter Haley comes home from school, she always asks to go pick strawberries, and the smile on her face when she one is just over the top, and I get a lot of joy from that. So
yeah, that's awesome. Fun. Yeah, that's and cool. You say you're a Phillies fan. I'm a Pirates fan, so I don't even know.
I'm actually a Yankees fan.
Oh, really?
I'm a Yankees fan, but I'm outside of Philadelphia, so I'm kind of learning not to hate the Phillies. How about that?
So what are your kids then? What are your kids? Are they Phillies, or are they going to go Yankees as well?
I'm letting them pick whoever they want, but my son just got his own Phillies hat, Phillies jersey, all that stuff. So I'm guessing he's probably head that way.
Yeah.
But honestly, who knows?
Right. That's great.
There's behind the scenes cheering.
Yeah. Now, it's funny how it works, though. When I was a kid, my grandfather tried to raise me as a Mets fan because this was 1986, 87. They were amazing, on top of the world.
Yeah.
But didn't stick. And all of a sudden, around 91, I chose to follow a horrible Yankees team because I like Don Mattingly.
Yeah. And the rest is history.
Nice.
That's it, man.
Well, you joked about doing podcasts for fun, but I do know that you really enjoy giving presentations, which is a skill that a lot of people struggle with. And so we're just wondering if you have any advice either for giving presentations or even getting published. You've got a lot of stuff that you've had published too. Maybe just some ideas to share with people in general. Yeah,
sure. I'll take the first part. Giving presentations in public, obviously, is just like talking to anybody. If you can talk to somebody and be confident on a topic, doesn't matter if it's in front of 1 or 2 or 10 or 100 people, in my opinion. And it's just an opportunity to be up there and talking about an issue you love. And publications, it's going after an idea or a topic you want to find out more about. And if you think it's a good idea and you haven't read a lot about it or saw a lot about it out there, it's probably worth going after. And just a quick story. When I said I was actually looking at the intersection of offshore wind and environmental justice last year, that stemmed from an opportunity I had to write a paper for Lexis at the beginning of this year, LexisNexis. They said, okay, Chris, environmental law in New York, 5,000 words. Go ahead. Okay. And kind of joking to myself at first. I didn't even know 5,000 words.
Right.
I thought, okay, what can I do that I have experience in? What can I do that I think might be impactful? So that's how I kind of combined two things I was working on a lot at the time that I didn't see a lot on in the scholarly papers and stuff, and just kept on going with it and turned it into the survey project and started developing a lot of very useful connections that I still have and potential opportunities for our business. So any types of publications and presentations you can get, if you keep talking about it and are passionate about these ideas, it could potentially turn into things down the line. And actually, I'm sorry, one other thought too. I've enjoyed all of them I've done, but I've done a number of them for students and actually youth groups also, including doing the Earth Day presentation for my high school for the last couple of years. Something about talking to students and getting them educated on certain topics and answering their questions is definitely exciting. Yeah, that's cool. What do you find is something, maybe one of the biggest things they struggle with? Well, it depends on the level it is, but I try to always, when I'm speaking to various student groups or kids, is just to tell them a little bit about what's going on in the environmental field and the importance of it and it as an option, as a career path. I went to a private boarding school for high school, and there's nothing wrong at all with it, but a lot of our graduates end up going into law, going into finance, just going after money. And that's, but not to be a dead horse here, but I think there's a possibility to do impactful work and still make a good living on top of it.
Yep, totally. Well, that was all the questions we had for you today. Is there anything else we missed that you'd like to talk about?
Yeah, actually, I just announced something on LinkedIn that I wouldn't mind bringing up.
Sure.
I try to do one general research topic every year. Last year, it was the environmental justice offshore wind stuff that I ended up turning into what's called the Alliance Projects, which is how we want stakeholder engagement to look going forward. And anyone who wants more info on that can go to Enviro-Sciences.com/the Alliance Projects. But the next one is going to be looking at the social carbon and what the impacts are in overburdened communities versus non-overburdened areas, and whether or not we're properly accounting for that in our planning efforts going forward. Hypothesis that with all these large infrastructure projects we're doing, they have extensive environmental and health benefits long term. But with all these moving parts and things happening at once, are we going into a period where we might have a bump in ambient emissions for 5 years, for 10 years? What does that actually look like? And if that is going to happen, what can we do to potentially buffer against that?
Yeah, it's really good. And I guess, the future of air quality, so there's lots of regulations coming out, lots of information coming out. You're doing studies like this now. Do you think we're headed in a good direction when it comes to air quality? Because I know sometimes greenhouse gases, even mentioning the term, can be kind of a triggering for people who work in NEPA, because we were doing it, then we weren't doing it, now we are doing it again. So do you think we're headed in the right direction, or do we still have some work to do?
I agree with you that it's frustrating when things change from one administration to another. But if you look at overall trend lines for ambient air concentrations, almost without exception, we're doing very well. But this important thing to highlight, though, there's not just greenhouse gases to worry about. It's a thing called co-pollutants like PM2.5 that also get kicked out into the atmosphere from fossil fuel combustion. And that's what actually causes localized health effects like asthma, like various heart problems at times. That one we still have to have work to do. And that's actually why, well, I would say one of the reasons why I've gotten so passionate about environmental justice is to try to address the hot pockets that we still have through the country, and what can we do to bring those down and make things a little more balanced.
Yeah, that's perfect. Yeah, thank you.
Sure.
Awesome. Well, good luck with all those projects. It's really important work that you're doing. People need to breathe clean air. So if people have questions for you, want to follow up, where can they get in touch with you?
Sure. I'm very active on LinkedIn, so I'm always open to chat there.
Awesome. Thank you so much. It was really great having this chat with you, and I hope you enjoy the rest of your weekend.
Thank you. You guys as well.
And that's our show. Thanks, Chris, for joining us today. We had a really good conversation. Please be sure to check us out each and every Friday. Don't forget to subscribe, rate, and review. See you, everybody.
Bye.